Wren Calloway noticed the footprints before she noticed anything else. They crossed the frozen surface of the creek behind her mill, shallow and uneven, the left ones deeper than the right, pressed into the ice, as if whoever made them had been leaning hard to one side. January in the Peace River country did not forgive carelessness on ice that thin. The prints stopped at the far bank, near the woodpile she had stacked in November, and did not come back. Wren set down her lantern and followed them. She found the woman half buried in the split wood, seated upright against the largest log, as if she had simply sat down to rest and then forgotten to stand again. Her coat was open at the front despite the cold, which told Wren the woman had gone past shivering into that dangerous stillness that came before the end. One hand pressed flat against her ribs, the other lay in her lap, fingers curled inward, dark with dried blood. "Hey," Wren said. She crouched in the snow and touched the woman's face. The woman's eyes opened, gray, frightened, alert in the way of something that had been running for a long time. "Don't," she said immediately. Wren pulled her hand back. "All right, don't take me inside." The woman's voice was low and cracked at the edges. "Don't call anyone. Just leave me here." Wren looked at the open coat, the blood, the ice crystals forming in the woman's dark hair. She looked at the temperature, -23. "I can't do that," she said. The woman closed her eyes. "Then God help you for what you'll find." Wren Calloway had lived alone on this quarter section outside Dunmore, Alberta, since the winter of 1908, which made it going on 4 years. She had come here with a husband named Frederick and a plan that involved cattle and a family, and the kind of ordinary life that people build without examining too closely. Frederick died of a burst appendix 11 days after they filed the homestead claim. The cattle had done well enough. The family had never started. The town of Dunmore knew her as a widow who kept to herself and ran a small lumber operation and paid her debts on time. That was the whole of what they knew, and Wren had worked to keep it that way. Not from shame, from the understanding that a woman alone on the frontier was only as safe as she was unremarkable. She was not a woman who frightened easily. She had delivered a calf alone at 2 in the morning in a January storm. She had faced down a man who had tried to take her timber rights through a forged transfer document. She had buried her husband in frozen ground with a shovel and her own hands because there was no one else to do it. But when she brought the injured woman inside and set her near the kitchen stove and finally saw what the open coat had been hiding, Wren Calloway went very still. The woman's left side bore a wound that had been hastily bandaged with torn fabric. That was not what stopped Wren. What stopped her was the rest of it, bruising across the woman's throat and jaw in the shape of fingers. A burn mark on the back of her right wrist, circular and deliberate. Old scars along her collarbone, pale and raised, the kind that came from something done slowly over time. Wren had seen accidents. She had never seen this kind of accounting. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. The woman opened her eyes. She seemed to be measuring Wren, deciding something. "Celia," she said at last. "Celia Drummond." Wren went still again. She knew that name. Everyone in Dunmore County knew that name. The constable's office had posted a notice 3 weeks ago. Celia Drummond, wanted for the death of her employer, a respected businessman named Harold Fitch of Peace River. The notice described her as dangerous and unstable and urged people to report any sightings immediately. Celia watched her remember. "There it is," she said. "So now you know." Wren looked at the bruises around the woman's throat. She looked at the burn on her wrist. She looked at the wound in her side that had bled through 2 layers of makeshift bandaging. "I know you're hurt," she said. "That's what I know right now." She boiled water and found clean cloth and worked on the wound for the better part of an hour. Celia did not make a sound the entire time, though Wren could feel the effort of that silence in the rigid set of the woman's jaw. "It's deep," Wren said, "but it missed anything vital. You need rest and warmth." "I need to not be here," Celia said. "Both." Celia looked at her hands. "The notice says I killed Harold Fitch." Wren waited. "You're not asking me if I did." Not yet, Wren said. Celia's mouth pressed into a thin line. Something in her face shifted, as if she were recalculating the distance between 2 points she had assumed were fixed. Why not? Wren sat back and looked at her directly. Because a woman who killed a man in cold blood doesn't crawl to a stranger's woodpile and ask to be left to die in the snow. She runs. A long silence settled over the kitchen. The stove ticked. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows with a sound like breathing. I did run, Celia said finally, for 3 weeks. Wren said nothing. I'm tired, Celia said, and it sounded less like a complaint than a fact she was reading from a document. I'm so tired of running from something I didn't do. Wren poured 2 cups of tea and set one in front of Celia. It was a small thing. It was also, she understood, a declaration. Then stop running, Wren said, and tell me what you did do. Before Celia could answer, hoofbeats sounded on the frozen track leading to the mill. Wren crossed to the window. 3 riders in the gray morning light. The one in front wore the coat she recognized. Long, dark wool, silver buttons catching the cold sun. Constable Roy Delamere of the Dunmore Detachment. The man behind him she didn't know. The third was Samuel Fitch, Harold's son, who at 26 already carried his father's particular expression of inherited certainty. Wren looked back at Celia, who had gone the color of the snow outside. Cellar, Wren said. Under the pantry. There's a false wall behind the potato bins. Push it left. Celia stared at her. Go, Wren said. Now. She helped Celia through the pantry door and waited until she heard the scrape of the false wall sliding into place. Then she straightened her hair, hung her apron on its hook, and went to answer the door. Roy Delamere stepped inside without being invited, which told Wren everything she needed to know about his state of mind. He was a careful man ordinarily. Careful men stopped being careful when they were worried. Morning, Mrs. Calloway, he said. Constable. She looked past him at Samuel Fitch, who remained in the doorway. Samuel, we're looking for the Drummond woman, Delamere said. Celia Drummond. We have reason to believe she passed through this area. I've seen the notice, Wren said. Have you seen her? Wren kept her voice level. I've seen a fox in the tree line twice this week and not much else. It's been 40 below. Nothing's moving out there if it doesn't have to. Delamere's eyes moved around the kitchen. They stopped briefly on the stove, where 2 cups of tea sat steaming. Wren had put them there herself. Early for company, he said. I make 2, she said. Habit from when Frederick was alive. I keep thinking I'll stop. It was true. She did make 2 cups most mornings. She had not planned to use that truth this way, but here it was, useful at last. Delamere's eyes moved to the pantry door. Mind if I take a look around? I'd prefer you didn't without a proper warrant, Wren said pleasantly. You know me, Roy. If you come back with the paperwork, I'll put the kettle on. A silence. Delamere looked at her for a moment with something that might have been respect and might have been frustration. Then he nodded once and turned back toward the door. Samuel Fitch had not moved. He was looking at Wren with an expression she could not entirely read. She murdered my father, he said. The notice says she did, Wren agreed. She kept her voice even. I'm sorry for your loss, Samuel. He held her gaze for one more second, then turned and followed Delamere out into the cold. Only after the hoofbeats faded to nothing did Wren let out the breath she'd been holding. She opened the pantry door. They're gone. Celia emerged from behind the potato bins, pale and shaking. She looked at Wren with an expression that Wren couldn't name at first, and then recognized slowly. It was the look of someone who had stopped expecting to be helped. You lied for me, Celia said. I kept my own counsel, Wren said, which I've always done. She pulled out a chair. Now sit down and eat something, and then you're going to tell me all of it. Celia ate half a bowl of porridge before she spoke. When she did, she kept her eyes on the table. Harold Fitch, she said, had been the most respected man in Peace River for as long as anyone could remember. He owned the largest dry goods operation in the district, sat on the board of the Anglican Church, donated generously to the hospital. People said he had built his fortune through hard work and good character. Celia had worked for him as a bookkeeper for 4 years. She was good with numbers. She kept her head down and did her job and tried not to notice what she noticed. "What did you notice?" Wren asked. Celia looked up. "Which column do you want first?" There were two, the money column and the other one, the money. Fitch's charitable donations were recorded twice in his ledger. Once in the books his accountant saw, and once in a private set she had stumbled across while organizing the back storeroom. The private books showed payments going out under charitable headings and coming back in through a different name entirely. A numbered company, registered in Edmonton, that Celia had quietly traced. The money was cycling. Fitch was taking tax relief on donations that never actually left his own accounts. The other column was harder to name. It had to do with the women who worked in the stock rooms and the back offices of his operation. Younger women, mostly. Women whose circumstances made them difficult to replace without complications. Celia had seen enough and heard enough to understand what was happening there. Though none of it was written down anywhere. "I went to Delamere," Celia said. Her voice had gone flat in the way of someone reporting information they have already spent too much emotion on. "I had the ledger pages. I had dates, figures, the registration documents for the numbered company. I gave him everything." Wren waited. "He took it all," Celia said. "He said he'd look into it." She looked down at her hands. 2 weeks later, Harold Fitch called me into his office and told me I was dismissed. He said he had spoken to Delamere and been made aware of certain accusations I had made, and that given my clear instability and dishonesty, my services were no longer required. She paused. He said it calmly, like he was closing a ledger. "What did you do?" I asked for my copies of the documents. He said he didn't know what I was referring to. I asked for my wages for the final month. He said they would be held pending a review of my performance. She looked up. "I had those documents in a second set at my boarding house." He must have known that because the next morning my room had been searched. The copies were gone. Wren said nothing. "I went back to Fitch," Celia said. "Not to threaten him. I want you to understand that. I went back because I thought, if I told him that I still intended to speak, that I had more copies, that I was going to find a way to be heard. I thought he might take me seriously. Instead, he told me that if I continued making accusations against his reputation, he would have me declared unfit. He said he had a doctor prepared to sign the paperwork. He said I would spend the rest of my life in a provincial asylum where no one would hear my voice." The kitchen was very quiet. "And then?" Wren asked. Celia's hands tightened in her lap. "And then he struck me, across the face with the back of his hand. He was 71 years old, and I was 29, and he did it because he had done it before to other women, and nothing had ever happened to him." She swallowed. "I picked up the letter opener from his desk. I held it in front of me, and I told him not to touch me again. I told him I would go to the Edmonton papers if I had to. I told him I wasn't afraid of him." "Were you afraid?" "Terribly," Celia said. "But I was more afraid of what would happen if I left without him believing me." She looked at her hands again. He laughed. He said the sort of thing that men like him say when they've stopped taking you seriously entirely. And then he stepped forward, and I stepped back, and I put the letter opener down, because I wasn't going to use it. I was never going to use it. And as I was setting it down, he grabbed my wrist. Her voice was completely steady now. "He fell. He pulled me with him, and his head struck the corner of the desk, and he fell, and I was on the floor beside him, and he was not moving." The silence stretched. "I panicked," she said. "I know how it looked. I know what someone walking in would have seen. I ran. I picked up the letter opener because my hands did it without thinking, and then I dropped it outside the door because I came back to myself, and I ran." She looked at Wren. "I have been running since November." Wren sat with everything Celia had told her. "The ledger pages," she said finally. "The originals and the copies are both gone." "Yes. Is there anything left?" Celia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "There's someone who saw the originals." She told Wren about a woman named Louise. a stockroom clerk who had come to Celia 3 months before the accident, quietly and at considerable risk to herself, to describe what Harold Fitch had done to her. Louise had seen the ledger pages when Celia showed her what she had found. Louise had understood what they meant. "She lives in Peace River still," Celia said. "She has a daughter. She's terrified. I would never ask her to come forward." "You wouldn't have to ask," Wren said. "I would." Celia looked at her. "Why?" Wren considered how to answer this. She thought about Frederick's grave behind the mill, which she still tended every week because it was right to do so, even though she had not been in love with him for some years before he died. She thought about the timber rights document, and the man who had tried to take her land, and the man who had tried to take her land, and the way the magistrate had looked at her when she walked into his office alone. "Because Delamere took those papers straight to Fitch," she said. "Which means he was already being paid to do it. Which means you're not fighting a dead man. You're fighting a corrupt constable and a wealthy family and a town that would rather believe you're unstable than believe what you're telling them." She looked at Celia directly. "And I have spent 4 years in this country watching what happens to women who try to be heard alone." Celia studied her. "You could lose this property if they decide you harbored a fugitive." Wren looked around the kitchen, the mill outside, the frozen creek, Frederick's grave beneath the spruce trees. 4 years of solitary work. "This isn't the only thing I'd lose," she said, "if I sent you back out into that cold." Over the following 2 days, the temperature dropped further, and the roads became impassable, which Wren decided to receive as a grace. Delamere would not come back until the weather broke. She and Celia had time. It was strange, sharing the mill house with another person. Wren had organized her solitude with great precision over 4 years. She knew which floorboards creaked, which window leaked cold air in a north wind, at what exact angle the lamp needed to sit to light the whole kitchen. She had built a life that fit her exactly. Celia did not disrupt it. She was quiet and neat, and asked before she touched anything that wasn't hers. On the second morning, Wren came downstairs to find the breakfast dishes already washed, the fire stoked, and Celia at the table with a piece of paper, making notes in a small, careful hand. She was reconstructing the ledger figures from memory. "You remember all of that?" Wren said. Celia didn't look up. "I kept those books for 4 years. Every line is in my head." Wren watched her write for a moment. The exactness of it, the patience. "You could have gone anywhere after he fell. You had a window." "I had nowhere to go that he didn't reach," Celia said simply. "And I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life being his proof that he'd won." That sentence sat in Wren's chest for the rest of the morning. On the second afternoon, Wren found Celia standing near the window, looking at the frost-covered spruce trees at the edge of the property. She was looking at one specific tree. "There's a grave out there," Celia said. "My husband," Wren said. Celia turned. "I'm sorry. He was a good man," said, which was true and was also, she had long understood, not the whole truth. "He was kind. He meant well. He just—" She stopped. He didn't see much of what was actually in front of him. Celia looked at her quietly. "He knew about the timber rights dispute," Wren said. "Before he died, he thought it would resolve itself. He said men like that usually backed down eventually." She looked at the grave. "I was the one who had to find out they didn't." It was the most she had said about Frederick to another person in 4 years. She wasn't entirely sure why she was saying it now. Something about the way Celia listened, perhaps, without trying to fix it or soften it. "Thank you for telling me," Celia said. It was such a plain thing to say. No pity in it, no fuss. "Right," Wren said, and cleared her throat and went to put the kettle on. On the third morning, the temperature lifted slightly. Wren made a decision. She hitched the smaller sleigh at first light and drove into Dunmore before the town was properly awake. She went to the post office, which opened at 6:30, and sent a wire to a name she had kept in her address book since the timber rights matter. A solicitor in Edmonton named Gareth Lund, who had a reputation for taking cases that the general legal establishment found inconvenient. Then she drove to the other end of town, to a small house on the river road, where a woman named Vera Whitmore lived with her 3 daughters and did laundry to keep them fed. Vera was the woman who had first told Wren, 3 years ago, that something was wrong at Fitch's operation. She had not had proof. She had had a younger sister who worked there, and who had stopped talking about her days at work the way that people stopped talking about things they were trying to forget. Wren knocked on Vera's door and waited. Vera answered in her housecoat, one of the daughters behind her clutching the fabric. When she saw Wren, something in her face shifted. "You've found her," Vera said. "She's safe," Wren said. "I need to know if Louise will talk to a solicitor." Vera looked at the daughter behind her. Then she stepped outside, pulling the door half closed, and lowered her voice. "Louise has been waiting for someone to ask her that question since November," she said. "She was afraid no one ever would." Wren drove back to the mill in the rising light, thinking about what Celia had said. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life being his proof that he'd won. She had been thinking about those words for 2 days, about what it cost to carry them, about the kind of endurance it took to keep going towards something when every door that opened showed you another door. Delamere came on the 4th day, as she had known he would. The weather had broken. The sky was that particular high blue that came after a deep cold snap, and the snow squeaked underfoot, and under any other circumstances it would have been beautiful. He came with 4 men this time. 2 Wren didn't recognize. One was Samuel Fitch. The 4th was a man named Dr. Archibald Croot, who was Harold Fitch's personal physician, and who had, according to the notice, signed the medical examiner's report. Wren stood in the mill doorway and watched them come up the track. Beside her, so quietly she almost didn't hear, Celia said, "Let me face him." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Celia said. "I want to. If he takes us into custody, he needs to do it while looking at me." Wren thought about arguing. She decided against it. Delamere stopped his horse at the yard's edge. "Mrs. Calloway, I have a warrant this time." "I can see that," Wren said pleasantly. "Come inside then, it's cold." They all came in. The kitchen felt considerably smaller with 6 people in it. Wren moved to the stove without hurry and kept her hands visible and her back straight. Delamere saw Celia in the same moment that Samuel Fitch did. Samuel stepped forward immediately. Delamere put an arm out to stop him. "Miss Drummond," Delamere said. Celia looked at him steadily. "Constable, you're under arrest for the death of Harold Fitch." "I know," Celia said. "I have a question first." Delamere's eyebrows moved. "I don't think the documents I gave you in October," Celia said. "The ledger pages and the registration papers for the numbered company in Edmonton. What did you do with them?" Silence. "I ask," Celia said, "because a solicitor from Edmonton arrived on the morning train yesterday and has spent the last 18 hours reviewing a reconstruction of those documents, made from my own memory. He's already wired the Edmonton Journal." She paused. "The original documents came to you, Constable. I have a record of the date I delivered them. What I don't have is a record of what you did with them next. I thought you might want to explain that to the solicitor yourself, rather than have him form his own conclusions." The kitchen was perfectly quiet. Dr. Croot, who had been standing near the door, cleared his throat. He looked at his hat brim. Samuel Fitch said nothing. His face had done something complicated that Wren couldn't entirely follow. Delamere was looking at Celia with an expression that had started as authority and was becoming something else. Something cornered. "Where is this solicitor?" he said. "Waiting," Wren said from the stove. "Along with Louise, who's agreed to make a statement, and Vera Whitmore, who can speak to what her sister told her, and 2 other women, whose names I'll leave to the solicitor to share." She looked at Delamere calmly. "Gareth Lund is particular about who knows what before he's ready. You understand." The name landed. Delamere knew Gareth Lund. Most people in this part of Alberta knew Gareth Lund. Samuel Fitch turned and walked out of the kitchen without a word. The door banged behind him. Dr. Croot looked at Delamere. He said quietly, "Roy, I signed that report based on what you told me about the scene. A pause. I didn't examine the body myself. Delamere looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Celia. Then he looked at the floor. It was not a dramatic moment. It was a small one. A man in the wrong light understanding the shape of the room he'd walked into. That was all. But Wren had learned that most things were settled in small moments. The dramatic ones came after. The inquest was held in Dunmore 6 weeks later, at the end of February when the roads were passable. Gareth Lund had filed 4 documents with the provincial court. Dr. Croot had submitted an amended report. Louise had given a statement which had taken 3 attempts and the presence of 2 women she trusted, but which was precise and detailed and completely devastating. 3 other women had come forward after Louise, quietly and in writing. The inquest determined that Harold Fitch had died as the result of a fall during a confrontation he himself had initiated. The coroner noted the presence of a documented pattern of conduct that had been suppressed by the local constabulary. Delamere was suspended pending a formal review. The matter of the numbered company was referred to the provincial tax authority in Edmonton. Samuel Fitch made no public statement. He had returned to Peace River the night after the kitchen confrontation and, according to what Vera heard through her sister, had spent 3 days going through his father's private papers. Whatever he found there, he did not swear. On the Sunday after the inquest concluded, Wren drove Celia to the Anglican church in Dunmore. Neither of them attended services. They sat in the sleigh in the cold morning light, and Wren let the horse rest while the town moved around them. Inside the church, she knew people would be talking. They had been talking since the inquest. Some were angry, some were ashamed. Most were doing the thing that communities did when something uncomfortable was proved true. They were deciding how much of it to carry and how much to set down. "You could stay," Wren said. She had not planned to say it, but it came out evenly, the way that true things did when she stopped managing them. Celia was quiet for a moment. The horse blew a great breath of steam into the January air. "I have nothing here," Celia said. "My position is gone. My reputation." She stopped. "Your reputation is that you told the truth when the constable and the doctor and the dead man's son were all lined up against you," Wren said. "In this country, that's not nothing." Celia turned to look at her. "I'm not asking you to stay because I need the company," Wren said. "I've been alone for 4 years and I know how to do it. I'm asking because you're competent and clear-headed and you can keep books the way other people breathe, and I have been keeping my own accounts with one hand since Frederick died, and making a mess of it." She kept her eyes on the church door. "And because I think you deserve somewhere that isn't a boarding house where someone can search your room in the night." The horse shifted. Snow sifted from the spruce branches at the road's edge. "I'd want to rebuild the proper set of ledgers for the women's claims," Celia said finally. "The numbered company, there are people still owed an accounting. Gareth Lund's office could use a careful correspondent in the district," Wren said. "I can write him." Celia looked at the church, looked at the town, looked at the gray winter sky over the Peace River country, which was vast and cold, and, on mornings like this, very beautiful in the way that hard things sometimes were. "I'll stay through spring," she said, "and we'll see." It was not a declaration. It was a beginning which was its own kind of courage. The congregation began to file out of the church. Several people looked toward the sleigh. One woman, older, in a dark wool coat, stopped on the steps and looked directly at Celia for a long moment. Then she gave a single small nod. Celia received it without flinching. Wren picked up the reins. She thought about the mill and the frozen creek and the footprints she had followed through the dark. She thought about how much of a life was made of those moments, the ones where you could have turned back and chose not to. "Come on," she said to the horse. And they drove home in the clear, cold light. Because a town could look away for years. But truth, once witnessed by enough ordinary people in enough ordinary kitchens, had a way of becoming the kind of thing that could no longer be conveniently forgotten.